Awesome, thank you.
Cool.
I pick. That's how I pick colors. Awesome. Thanks.
I can go change her.
I also didn't know 100%.
I almost told her I have to check because the shirt's white. I'm like, I don't have a white pen, dude. I don't know what you want me to do.
My shoes are brown.
If you judge me tomorrow, what color shirt would you want me to wear?
I have no preference to the color shirts. Like, look at the.
As long as you don't match.
Look at the.
I got purple.
Right.
I'll wear purple.
And like, I mean, I have 2 different shades of blue, so it's fine.
What if I wore gray?
I would use black or brown. Kids are gonna start wearing tie-dye polo shirts just to my rounds specifically one of these days. I'm just gonna have to change my.
It's gonna be like KU debate all over again with their jerseys.
Is everybody good? Alright. Contention 1 is inherency. While the power exists, Cyber Command hacking capabilities don't get used. Bing and 18. Obama and Trump administrations have made decisions allowing Cyber Command to escape NSA shadowing, yet the government appears to be desperately avoiding cyber conflict with Russia and any other entity. Cyber Command's full capabilities are only increasing as more stories surface of interference in U.S. networks by Chinese and foreign hacking groups. B is the plan. The United States federal government shall instruct the U.S. Cyber Command to engage in offensive cyber operations against Iran and China. Contention 2 is solvency. A. Cyber Command is necessary for hackback and prevent conflict. Naked 18. In the event of destructive or disruptive attacks or circumstances, counteroffensive operations are the only means to stop the attack. Companies cannot engage in disruptive activity of their own network. Private companies looking or hacking back could start wars that the military would need to finish. There are circumstances by the U.S. that they might want offensive capability to collect intelligence in order to help protect critical infrastructure. There's no way for the U.S. government and critical infrastructure companies to carry out real-time coordination to work with the U.S. Cyber Command. Will institute a process for determining when to provide the form of assistance creation of a classified network for critical infrastructure and for instituting new policies that will make it possible for the companies to show and operate infrastructure to hold clearances connecting to the Cyber Command or provide with the private sector wants intelligence on threats and counteroffensive capability while maintaining government responsibility. And B. The U.S. should focus on strong offense over the current defensive strategies. Solmeyer and 18. The United States has been the victim of repeated cyber attacks by foreign powers and it seems to have little power to stop them. The focus on cyber deterrence is understandable, misplaced, and seeking immediately to deter enemies. The United States finds itself constantly on the back foot. Instead, the United States should be pursuing more active cyber policy, one aimed at disrupting the capabilities in cyber warfare. In Washington, if you recognize that the best defense is good offense, it is virtually impossible to know deterrence of where the United States hopes and wins. It should spend less time trying to persuade its competitors that it's not worth hacking, more time preventing them degrading their ability to do so. The United States should be ready to take more offensive action. U.S. hackers should pursue a campaign of erasing computer skill, disabling accounts, and credential used by hackers to attack and cutting off access to services so as to compromise systems. Such a campaign would aim to make every aspect of hacking much harder. Targeting these would sabotage their capabilities, render them otherwise useless. While the United States enemies already attacking it online, the country will need to be more proactive than it has been thus far. Next is the advantage, or advantage 1, Iran. A. Devastating cyber attacks from Iran are imminent. Get nothing stopping them from non-stop cyber warfare against the U.S. Pro-Roth and 18. Trump's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal will lead to a surge in retaliatory cyber attacks from Iran. Within 24 hours, Trump announced the U.S. would lead the deal. Researchers have a notable shift in Iranian cyber activity. Iranian hackers were sending malware to diplomats of U.S. allies and employees trying to infiltrate their computer system. Iranian hackers have in research demonstrated an increasingly sophisticated arsenal of digital weapons. Cybersecurity experts believe quickly expanded the business infrastructure in the United States after the United States tied economic sanctions against Iran in 2012. States supported Iranian hackers that retaliated by disabling the websites of nearly every major U.S. bank while also denial of the service of attack. There is evidence that Iranian hackers have been responsible for a string of attacks in several Saudi petrochemical plants. A U.S. official suspected the Iranian hackers also played a role in this more serious attack was the first step in attack design, trigger chemical explosion, or used in thousands of other installations, including nuclear plants. The Saudi Arabia attack was a training drill for future attack on infrastructure and energy company in the United States. There's little deterrent to stop them from trying again. And B. U.S. nuclear weapon systems highly vulnerable to cyber attacks. McCaskill and 18. U.S. nuclear weapon systems are increasingly vulnerable to cyber attacks. Nuclear weapon systems were developed before the advancement of computer technology. Little consideration was given to potential cyber vulnerabilities. Current nuclear strategy overlooks the use of technology, nuclear weapon system, and threat from hostile states. The likelihood of cyber attacks on nuclear systems relatively high and increasing from an advanced persistent threat from state groups. Thus, U.S. nuclear tipped missiles are vulnerable to cyber attacks. There are pathways through actors infiltrating the nuclear weapons without a state's knowledge. And C. Nuclear missiles can easily be hacked and launched in a matter of minutes, well into 15. Our nuclear missiles could be hacked, launched, and detonated without authorization, lead to mass fatalities, as in, say, the millions of lives lost in the early stages of the nuclear war. We keep hundreds of missiles on hair-trigger alert that enables the launch of a fully armed nuclear weapons under 15 minutes. Indeed. Hacking into nuclear weapon systems will cause escalation in nuclear war. Griffin and 18. Hackers cause nuclear weapons to be accidentally launched against other country systems that have a number of vulnerabilities to allow for cyber attackers to break into and use them to trigger daily nuclear weapons. Cyber attacks and nuclear weapons can cause an escalation which results in their use. Cyber vulnerabilities within nuclear weapon systems and structures present a whole set of dangerous risk. Cyber attacks lead to deliberate misinformation. The inadvertent launch of nuclear weapons. The most devastating military threat comes from nuclear war started by miscalculation. Accidental nuclear wars happen many times already, with thousands of hair-trigger alert already ready to launch. E. An accidental launch would lead to retaliatory strikes and extinction within half an hour. Minso 1. And no more than 2 minutes, Russia or U.S. could launch missiles at Washington or Moscow. Early warning system would detect the other side missiles within tens of seconds, causing the accidental enemy to mount retaliatory strikes. Within half an hour, there could be a nuclear war that could distinguish all of us. Advantage 2 is China. A. Chinese hacking continues with no U.S. action. Reynolds and 18. With attention focused on Russia, we need more attention. Meddling done by China. China's a bigger threat in general. The Chinese were figured a massive 2015 hack that was so damaging dubs as Cyber Pearl Harbor. It's not as if China stopped. China's main intelligence agency has focused on influence operations. And B. Chinese hackers are moving towards satellite military operations. Reuters and 18. Hacking campaign launched from China burrowed deeply into satellite operations. Defense contractors in the United States, the effort driven by national espionage such as interception of military communication disruption of satellites that leave military installations subject to huge real-world disruptions. And C. One satellite hack will destroy entire systems and cause lashouts. Haskins and 18. Satellites prime target for cyber attacks and get access to the satellite system and manipulate where the satellite goes and what it does, essentially dubbing it a satellite is knocked out of orbit. The debris could create a domino effect damage to other satellites, with the number of satellites set to triple the stakes have never been higher. Government would face pressure to identify a perpetrator and quickly. Governments don't always get it right, and innocent parties take the fall all in all frame. This is self-defense, so you basically justify whatever response you do. And D. Trump will retaliate to a satellite attack with a space war. Bender and Klimas in 18. China are years ahead of the United States in developing the means to destroy satellites in the event that their space life on has come untold collateral damage to spread of battlefields on Earth. The Defense Secretary warned attack on space systems should not be considered an improbable act. Trump's recent call for establishing a space force, my new national strategy for space, recognizes that space is a warfighting domain, Trump said. And any harmful interference with components of our space architecture will be met with a deliberate response. We have a president that we have to expect that space will be a warfighting domain. When the Pentagon talks about a space war, it doesn't mean troops in celestial camouflage. The conflict can take many forms, the potential for any actual physical attack. This means that if shots are fired in space, the United States may fight back through other means. And E. Space war goes nuclear. Broder and 16. Scenarios may read like science fiction. A space Pearl Harbor, a sneak attack on U.S. satellites cripples American forces before a shot has been fired. As Pentagon's plan are seriously worried, a war in space would have staggering implications, and although such a conflict might start in space, I should say it could easily turn to full-scale war on Earth. If war does not extend into space someday, the first nuclear response is not going to be in space. Cross-X.
Okay. On your inherency, you say that the capability exists, but they're not used. Why not? Why aren't we hacking back now?
They just don't do it. Like recently in July, the NSA gave more authority to the Cyber Command to basically do what they wanted, and they just haven't been doing it for whatever reason.
We don't know what reason though. Like
there's an attitudinal inherent barrier as to why they're not attacking. They're just not doing it.
Okay. Can you explain in your Solvency A card, like, can you just point out to me what warrant specifically says Cyber Command is necessary?
Yeah, it says, there's no way the U.S. government, critical infrastructure companies to carry out the real-time coordination to work with the Cyber Command. The U.S. will institute a process for determining when to provide the form of assistance. And it says, connecting the Cyber Command, provide what the private sector wants, intelligence on threats and counteroffensive capability while maintaining government responsibility.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
All right. What specifically is it about hackbacks? Okay, actually, let me put it this way. So we are, like, if I'm understanding your plan correctly, we basically come out and say, like, if Iran and China are going to hack us, we hack them back, right?
Well, I'm saying they should do it now. They should hack Iran
because these attacks are...
They've already started.
Okay.
China's been caught multiple times. Iran literally has said multiple times they want to attack the U.S. and security officials found out that a drill that they did in Saudi Arabia and hacked into their chemical and nuclear plants was a training to do it in the United States.
Okay, so we hack back now because these attacks are already happening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got that. Is it also a deterrence measure to prevent other countries, or is it just straight offense?
I mean, I'm sure that would happen inevitably because it says that we can literally take out their capabilities to where they do not work anymore and that they will not be able to do it again. So it would deter those countries, and then other countries and other non-state groups would also be deterred because we know where they're coming from. It's just the action of actually doing it.
Okay. What is there on the China on satellites? Is there an impact besides space war retaliation, aside from satellite hacks?
I mean, it leads to lash outs. So if a satellite gets hacked, immediately we may not know exactly who did it, and so somebody like Trump is probably just going to lash out at whoever they possibly can. And it actually says in the card that basically whenever they don't know, they're just going to pick a target and go with it. So random innocent parties will be attacked.
I'm gonna start that.
Also, I'm just curious, your laptop is black, but the green light is still on. Does that mean it's still on?
If the green light is on, it should be recording.
Okay.
Max will black screen when they're inactive.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
If that green light goes away, that's when you're hello.
Gotcha.
Stop in 2 minutes. Order is 2 off. Anyone not ready? First on the DISAD, A, the U.S. response to cyber attacks has been diplomatic so far, Y16. In the early stages of cyber war, U.S. response has been mainly diplomatic. The example was sanctions on North Korea after the hack that took down the Sony network. B, the perception of a U.S. move towards an offensive advantage leads to conflict escalation. Eilstrup, San Giovanni, 17. Danger arising from offensive advantage that heightens the risk of misunderstandings leading to crisis escalation. Pressure to act fast in the cyber domain means tactical decisions have to be made before actors are in possession of all the facts. This may lead to decisions being based on worst-case scenario assumptions. This approach carries high risk of inadvertent crisis escalation. An apparent cyber attack could be a simple accident. C. The U.S. and China's security cultures create the mutual risk of first strike Libicki 12. One stabilizing factor in cyber crisis is that one side cannot disarm another and therefore has no reason to act on its growing nervousness if the other side may be plotting a cyber attack. This logic, however, presumes that both sides understand as much and they may not. Some within the U.S. national security community still believe preemptive counterforce has its place. Military cultures that place a larger emphasis on stratagems and preemption, example China's, may even be more willing to carry out a cyber attack in the hopes that it will make them safer by disarming their foes. D. Iran would solicit help from China and Russia, escalating to attacks that would be used as public justification for invasion. Libicki 12. Third parties would be a minor problem compared to both with what arrives should a seriously competent cyber power like Russia or China get into the fray. Cyberspace permits such powers to curry favor with one side without necessarily making the other side an enemy. Third parties may also have a stake in starting or conversely holding a crisis. The crisis turns into conflict. They have a stake in the outcome. A last motivation for outside powers is to find out where the U.S. military is vulnerable to a disruptive attack, as well as how the U.S. military would respond to an attack. A grateful Iran would be more than willing to supply them intelligence on U.S. forces of the sort that could be gained only by being in hostile contact with them. This interest could not be pursued given the consequences of getting caught, but if one combatant will be predisposed to blame its adversary rather than a third party for any mischief in cyberspace, it may figure the risks are lower. What would the U.S. do with knowledge that the Iran is getting help? Perhaps it would be in U.S. interest to discover that Iran has carried out more sophisticated attacks that solidifies domestic support for military operations. E. Cyber escalation leads to nuclear war. Gady 15. Attackers from cyberspace could spoof networks into reporting that nuclear missiles have been launched, which would demand immediate retaliatory strikes. Hackers could manipulate communication systems into issuing unauthorized launch orders to missile crews. Attackers could directly hack into missile command and control systems launching weapons. Cyber weapons have brought us to a situation of aggravated nuclear instability. This brings us to the counterplan. The United States Department of Homeland Security should engage in hackbacks against Iran and China. First, the DHS is in charge of defensive cybersecurity, DHS 18. The DHS has the lead for the federal government for securing computer systems and works to secure critical infrastructure and information systems, analyze and reduce cyber threats, and coordinate their response to cyber incidents. And the CP solves. The DHS is key to domestic cybersecurity. They're the best at private sector and interagency cooperation, the use of new technologies, and training new personnel. Orlando 18. There are three particularly important components for called in for DHS's strategy that warrant reiteration: identification of the right partners, the use of innovative and emerging technologies to supplement human-centric activities, and dedication to closing the cybersecurity skill gap. DHS understands domain expertise is key and will look to involve individuals who have experience protecting and hardening systems at the federal level, those who know how to cohesively bring together people and systems. Additionally, partners will need to have an understanding of the geopolitical implications around protecting national infrastructure today. To counter cyber attacks, we have to be able to work more efficiently and faster than cyber criminals, something AI and machine learning can enable by extending capabilities and reach of our human cyber defenders, especially while industry faces a staggering talent shortage that continues to worsen. AI and machine learning are critical tools to help strengthen the nation's cybersecurity posture. DHS is committed to recruitment and retention of individuals with these skill sets. One such example of this commitment is their continued investment in the National Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. The entire DHS cybersecurity strategy is necessary and important for the continued protection of our nation. Cyber attacks will continue to spill over into the physical world and potentially impact life and safety. It's the right combination of partners, technology, and expertise that will ultimately bring DHS's next generation capabilities to bear. The net benefit? The DHS was created to be defensive, not offensive, which means it protects critical infrastructure without escalation that we see in the DISAD Bush 03. The Homeland Security Secretary shall be responsible for protection of critical infrastructure. The Secretary shall coordinate protection for each of the critical infrastructure sectors. The Secretary will maintain an organization to serve as a focal point for the security of cyberspace. The organization includes analysis, warning, information sharing, vulnerability reduction, mitigation, aiding national recovery efforts for critical infrastructure information systems. And we compete because instance of perms, any instance of the app links into the DISAD. Go to solvency. First, retaliations that seem defensive as preparations for a first strike lead to an escalatory conflict. Sabenius 17. The operation described could look defensive or could be used purely in retaliation for aggression of some kind. From the Russian perspective, this potential will make the implants look like an offensive cyber operation and prompt defensive measures that would in turn threaten the U.S. The cycle could escalate from there. When a state takes defensive measures, other states can perceive such behavior as threatening and respond accordingly. The line between offense and defense is even blurry in cyberspace. To assure their own cybersecurity, states will sometimes intrude into strategically important networks of other states will threaten the security of those states, risking escalation, undermining stability. And these cycles of escalation turn the case. They'll affect the economy and critical infrastructure quicker. Sanger 18. The risks of escalation of U.S. action in foreign networks are considerable. Clearly, what we've been doing so far isn't working, but you want to think through the consequences carefully. The chief risk is that the internet becomes a battleground of all against all as nations, but also begin to engage in daily network and counterattack. And the AF's threats lack credibility. Any improvement would take such a massive response that consequences would be prohibited for American foreign policy. Libicki 17. Credibility remains an issue when it comes to cyber deterrence. The U.S. has yet to retaliate to any cyber attack with truly serious consequences that the rest of the world can see. It's difficult to see how the threat of such future punishment would deter them after 2-week public responses. The credibility of U.S. reprisals cannot be ranked very high. It would not take a serious response to raise credibility of possible U.S. response off its current floor. Put another way, if the U.S. wanted to achieve credibility for a cyberspace deterrence policy, the cost of doing so would not be small. What this means, basically, is that even if we are going to hack back, like we have had incidences where we've hacked back, like the Sony hack from North Korea and the DNC hack, like even when we've tried to respond with retaliation, it hasn't been credible. There hasn't really been any instance in which that works. Skip the next few cards, go down to the bottom too. The use of offensive operations encourages an all or nothing escalation, particularly when paired with kinetic strategies, Libicki 12. Dangerously for stability, state that uses a no warning attack to gain an advantage in circumstances that do not necessarily promise a quick conclusion, may be tempted to force a quick conclusion through a more intensive application of force. Decisions on whether or not to commit force early in a crisis will then tilt toward commitments. The attacker escalates sooner on the presumption that is a limited window of opportunity to take advantage of his opponent's confusion. The use of a tactic or technique like offensive cyber war operations, whose success is synergistic with heavy force commitment, promotes escalation at the expense of hedging, therefore complicating crisis control. And offensive tactics emphasize hasty action. Alstrop, San Giovanni, 17. When offense is strong relative to defense, it becomes imperative for states to react quickly. The compulsion to react fast is amplified by changing vulnerability of cyber targets. Offensive advantage encourages arms racing. When offense is strong, states find equally sized forces are inadequate to support a defensive strategy. Instead, they conclude they require substantial lead military force to defend against attacks. As triggers competitive arms building. Even states that merely wish to defend the status quo strive to build up their military arsenals. Open for cross-ex. And I can... if you want, I can upload a new document that just has the cards.
I got the ones you had.
Okay.
Because you just went from after lack credibility to offensive obsolete to all or nothing, right? Everybody else good? Awesome. Alright, so let's talk about the counterplan.
Sure.
So, what's the status?
Conditional.
Conditional. Okay. So you say the DHS is key to domestic cybersecurity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like in July, they the NSA gave more authority to the cyber command so that they would be taking over like cybersecurity. So doesn't that kind of thump any form of solvency for the counterplan?
I mean, yeah, Cyber Command can do stuff, but that doesn't take away the ability of DHS to do stuff.
Right. Okay. And so I guess then that comes down to the net benefit, right? So it says the DHS was created and that they can prevent escalation. Where in this card does it say that they prevent escalation?
Which card are you looking at again?
The net benefit card, the Bush 03, that says.
Oh, it's.
Because I mean that's how you don't link to the DA, right? You prevent escalation. So
right.
Where does it say that in the card?
Based on being defensive, not offensive. How it says
But you said, but the text of the counterplan was do the plan. So that means you do offensive operations.
Right, yes, but it's the perception of DHS not being a military organization like Cyber Command is.
Right, but where in the card does it say that there will not be escalation from the DHS doing operations?
It doesn't say that there won't be escalation, but it talks about how Homeland Security is responsible for protection and not necessarily
right,
aggression.
and so that was actually going to be my next question. It says
right.
protection of critical infrastructure, sure,
right.
But where does it say that they're in charge and responsible for the protection of cyber critical infrastructure? Because I mean, critical infrastructure is literally defined by the DHS. They're the one who defined the term of art for it. So where does it say this specific sector that the resolution's talking about?
It says the secretary, I don't know if this answers your question, but it says the secretary will maintain an organization to serve as the focal point for security of cyberspace.
Okay. We'll talk about the DA now. So it says the perception of a U.S. moves towards an offensive advantage leads to conflict escalation, right?
Right.
So, why? So, who are we going to go to conflict with? China? And so is the impact just a U.S.-China war?
I mean, yeah, in this case, in the context of the plan, it'd be China, Iran, maybe Russia if they decide to get into it. The Libicki 12 cards talks about how, the D card talks about how, once we get Iran involved, it brings China and Russia in. So.
Okay. That's fine. So then you also say retaliations that seem defensive appear as preparations for a first strike.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not defensive. So how does that link?
I mean, even retaliations that might seem defensive. If someone were to take the plan as an action of, oh, we are defending because you're hacking us, we're defending ourselves, we're going to hack back.
Okay, we're out of time. So. I'll start. you read the unilateral declarations one?
No, I did not.
Gotcha. Okay, I got 130 left. I'm just saving. And it's going to go solvency, advantage 1 of Iran, advantage 2 of China, then the disadvantage, and then
Solvency first, you said?
the. Is everybody good? Good. Awesome. As an overview on the case real quick, the problem is that she doesn't put any actual mitigation on my offense, meaning that even at best all of this solvency mitigation is mitigation at best, meaning that even if you grant her all of the solvency cards, if I beat out the disadvantage, there's no reason you still don't vote for the affirmative first. She tries to claim that I lead to a first strike, but I want you to extend across the neck evidence saying that key to hackback is actually key to actually solving for the conflict that's inevitably going to occur, and that right now Iran and China are going to try to cause some form of conflict with the United States unless we hack back first to destroy their capabilities that prevent any type of cyber escalation in the future, meaning that we actually solve back for the empirical roots of this impact card, meaning that inevitably the affirmative is the prior question on this. Her next argument is that the threats of this actually turn the case. But once again, the Solmar evidence actually answers this by saying that taking a strong offensive approach keeps other people from leading other attacks against the United States. And by taking an offensive approach in which we post-date her on this question, we're actually able to solve back, prevent other countries, and view us as the threat, meaning that they're never going to lash out back against the United States because they see the capabilities we accrued. Her next argument is that the affirmative lacks threat credibility on these different issues. But I want you to extend across from both of the advantage flows the Pearl Roth evidence that Iran is literally doing training exercises to be able to attack the United States on our nuclear and chemical proposition sectors. Also on the China advantage, the Reuters evidence from 2018 also said that China is moving toward our satellite infrastructure and that they're trying to find ways to attack us, meaning we do have credible threats. Also, we post-date her on this question. Her only other argument on the solvency flow is that offensive operations lead to all or nothing action. But once again, I want you to look at the Solmar evidence saying that we're actually key to deterrence and stopping them from attacking in the future. I'm post-dating her on all this and come from actual defense experts from the Pentagon that are actually saying that this is the only way to prevent them from attacking in the long term, meaning that we saw back for all this offense. Go to Iran. You can extend across the pro-rot evidence that I talked to on the solvency floor, meaning that cyber operations are going, or cyber attacks are imminent from Iran, and that they're doing training exercises in the Middle East to be able to attack us right now. She never answered this. The McCaskill evidence also goes uncontested. That's the B card saying that nukes are currently vulnerable and that they're able to be hacked. For the Wellen evidence, specifically, silo nukes we have in the United States could be hacked in under 15 minutes and launch and lead to miscalculation and lash outs against other countries. The Griffin evidence goes uncontested as well that this leads to escalation of nuclear proliferation because other countries are going to lash out against one another, not knowing what happened. Also, her evidence, or also they don't. Also, we have a South Park character as the president, so I think he's going to lash out immediately if this is going to occur. Also, the Mintz evidence goes uncontested well that this is going to lead to extinction when our probability and time frame on the disadvantage because it could happen at any time. Stride die for the affirmative. Go to China. You can extend across the Reynolds evidence that hacks are been occurring against the United States for years from China, and that they are currently moving to being able to take much more destructive attacks against critical infrastructure. The Reuters evidence goes uncontested that China is actually trying to get into our satellite infrastructure, and they could reposition satellites and attack against other places around the world, making them lead to hurting our military operations and being able to prevent us from using critical infrastructure appropriately. The Haskins evidence goes uncontested well, saying that that this is going to lead to lash outs. That's the impact here. It says Trump literally said to the public, if our satellites get attacked, I'm going to deal with it how I see necessary. And the Haskins evidence indicates that we are going to lash out against other countries as a result because we don't always know who hacks a satellite, meaning Trump will pick a threat and attack it, which will lead to war. The B and K evidence, that's the D card, also goes uncontested that it leads to a space war. Not necessarily us fighting up in space, but it leads to a transition onto the, in the United States home front and around the world in which we're actually going to attack inevitably. She also drops the broader evidence that leads to nuclear proliferation, which leads to extinction. We're definitely outweighing the disadvantage and the counterplane here. Let's go to the DA now, first. Her uniqueness evidence isn't very good on this. It literally said that the U.S. is responsible and has been diplomatic. First of all, that card's from 2016. It's only talking about North Korea doing one hack. I want you to look at all of the different hacks that have been done by China and Iran that are not being diplomatic right now. That means that currently we are not being diplomatic. Also, I would assume that this evidence isn't indicative of a Trump presidency, which means that all diplomacy is currently dead, meaning we can't solve for the impact of the disadvantage based on diplomacy anymore. Also, she tried to claim that the perception of threat is going to lead to conflict. But first of all, the perception of threat already exists. We literally already been attacked by multiple countries, meaning that should have triggered a Trump lash out against other countries if this type of thinking were actually true. Also, she tries to claim that it's going to lead to a war with Russia and China. But first, Trump has ruined relations with Russia. Al Jazeera in July of this year. Putin and Trump have committed to improving relations between the U.S. and Russia. Trump has the need for continued diplomacy over confrontation. The two countries need to work together to cope with challenges such as terrorism, international crime, the economy, and the environment, while pointing out to counterterrorism and cybersecurity areas in which they are already doing so. Putin said he would make glad at the outcome we made in the first important step. Also, the only other scenario here is that we cause war with China. But turn U.S.-Chinese competition inevitable. The only way to avoid war is through technological dominance. Heath and 18. The structural drivers of U.S.-China competition are too deeply to result the cooperative engagement policymakers must instead accept the reality of strategic rivalry and aim to management. Conflict is not inevitable. The best option is the point is, paradoxically, for the U.S. to accept the reality of a growing strategic rivalry and maintain a technological edge. Successfully managed rivalry policy should ensure the U.S. retains its status as a global leader in technology, meaning that the affirmative is the only way to be able to solve back for any war with China, meaning we turn this. Also, she tries to claim that it's going to lead to Iran being able to get help, but if we solve for the technological edge that Iran currently has, we solve back for this as well, per the affirmative. Yeah, there's no impact here. We're able to solve back. Also, yeah, we should have already seen some kind of impact if it were true. Let's go to the CP. On the counterplan, first of all, her evidence saying that it's not going to lead to escalation literally doesn't say that anywhere in the card. It just said the DHS is key to critical infrastructure. The DHS works with the NSA, who literally gave jurisdiction to the Cyber Command to be able to do this, meaning that they are the best current actor. Also, Cybercom is the only agency that can successfully hack back. This is from Panganini in 2018. We posted. Experts with experience in the private sector, intelligence community, and military agree that the private organization victim cyber attack to delegate the response to the U.S. cyber command. Private companies have no intelligence capabilities to attribute the attack to a specific threat actor and have no specific offensive capabilities. Private companies are not legally authorized to do. The majority of the cases attacks are against critical infrastructure because specifically skilled, and the Cybercom has them as the agency that is best resourced to respond to threats of national interest, critical infrastructure in the energy, financial, water, commercial space. Cut the guard in space. Also, burn do both. There's no reason the DHS can't handle the diplomacy if for solvency is true, and the cyber command can be doing the internal operations of actually hacking back against other countries, meaning we solve back. Also, on solvency, literally none of our solvency cards say the DHS can actually do the plan anywhere in the cards. It literally just says that the DHS protects critical infrastructure. There's not a solvency advocate for this. The cyber command is the only one who can do offensive operations, meaning we solve back. There's no risk of the counterplane solving back. There's no net benefit because the DA is taken out, and the permutation would solve back for the DA, meaning it's not competitive as well.
Starting prep. There's gonna be 2 new cards. They're just at the bottom of the file.
Just the very bottom 2 card. Oh, on the counter plan.
They're like at the
wait.
bottom of the paper, like entirely.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Order is gonna be disadvantage, counterplan case. That's all I see. Okay. Everyone ready?
Mhm.
Okay, first on the disadvantage, they say that the response to current attacks are not diplomatic. You can extend my Y16 uniqueness card because he's right. We're not doing anything in response to cyber attack. That's pretty diplomatic if you ask me. Like, just not responding to cyber attacks? Like, yeah, the Sony thing was a few years ago. If all of these attacks are currently happening right now, we're just not doing anything. That means, like, that's probably almost the most diplomatic response you can have. It means we're not actively out there being the aggressors and going after countries for, like, cyber striking or hacking our infrastructures. I want you to extend the Alstrep 17 card that says that it's very just the perception of the move to offense, which is what causes escalation. He doesn't respond to this at all. It doesn't matter if the plan works or not. Just the fact that people are going to be perceiving that we are moving to offense is what causes the escalation and the impact scenario of the disadvantage. He doesn't respond to my specific arguments that the China and Iran specifically, this is going to lead to more escalations with the first strike with China because of the culture, and how Iran is going to look to Russia and China, and how this escalation is going to cause problems. Like, okay, sure, Trump warms up with Russia, okay. Like, that's not really responsive to the fact that Iran is going to be looking to Russia and China for support if we pass the plan and have Cyber Command actively hacking back on Iran. He says U.S.-China war is inevitable and technical dominance is required to solve for this, but he doesn't solve for technological dominance. All he does is solve for hackbacks. All he does is say, we're going to hack back against China. He offers you no evidence to support the fact that we are going to be technologically dominant when it comes to China. If his evidence is true and Iran and China have the upper leg on us right now, he has no way to solve for this. This disadvantage flows through. You can vote on the nuke war impact. Any risk of the disadvantage is a reason to vote there. On the counter plan, the Bush 03 card, he's right, it doesn't say in Bush 03 that we don't cause escalation. The tag on what the card says is that, what this card says is that Homeland Security is able to protect critical infrastructure. That's what it says. It says DHS was meant to be defensive, not offensive, and that is the whole point of the net benefit on the counterplan. The net benefit is that DHS is not offensive like Cyber Command is. Cyber Command is a military agency. Anything they do is going to be perceived as offensive. Since DHS is not a military agency in the same sense as Cyber Command is, it's defensive in nature. It doesn't trigger the dissat. We still get access to the net benefits there. He says perm do both. Well, DHS handles the diplomacy. First of all, this doesn't work. It still links into the dissat, and this is an intrinsic perm. There's no mention of diplomacy in either the counter plan or in the affirmative plan text. This is a voting issue. Your plan is literally just hack us back. It makes the app a moving target. Makes it harder for me to generate links to offense. On case. The case arguments are pretty similar to the disadvantage arguments in how its deterrence is one, ineffective, and two, just the perception of these kinds of escalatory attacks are going to be what causes conflict in the long run. I'll come back to it, but starting with the Perlroth and Reuters card, here he says, I think he misunderstands the credibility card that I read here. It's not what he's arguing is not what the card is saying. It's not that we don't have credible threats, because yeah, China and Iran are definitely credible threats. It's that the U.S. as an institution, Cybercom as an institution, does not have credibility in establishing deterrence. That's what the card says. It says the U.S. is not going to be able to have credible deterrent effects because they haven't responded to cyber attacks in the past time. Any advantages or solvency he tries to garner off of deterrence doesn't work. This argument flows through the round. All he says on the arguments that offensive attacks are offensive uses are bad is that we stop it in the future and that we solve back for these offensive attacks. You can't solve back if these offensive attacks are continuing to cause escalation, especially when you pair them with other strategies. If we are trapped in this cycle of escalation, there's no way you can solve back, because it's just countries hacking each other back and forth. It just goes on and on and on until we get to like the nuke war scenario outlined in the dissat or in your advantages, where people are attacking each other because you don't have that deterrence that you need in order to be effective, because the U.S. doesn't have any credibility. That argument flows through the round. Further, threats of retaliation lead attackers to hide their tracks. The U.S. does a poor job providing evidence. This kills deterrence and risks increasing attacks. Levikian 17 says, the ability to attribute and the ability to evade attribution are a measure-countermeasure game. If the prospects of reprisals are daunting enough, hackers can be expected to take pains for keeping from getting caught carrying out cyber attacks. Hence, countermeasures to attribution can be expected. Another way of putting it is that attribution will be good until it becomes useful, at which point it will cease being good. The U.S. government has made less progress in explaining why it believes attribution is correct. The public justification of Russian attribution for the DNC hacks is more problematic. The two public documents released were generally deemed far from satisfactory. If potential attackers come to believe that innocence is no guarantee against reprisal, what is the point of being innocent? Cut there. And then, basically, like, the round is boiling down to the fact that the app is an offensive strategy that leads to cycles of escalation. This links into the case turns on solvency. This links into the disadvantage. The AF doesn't have the ability to solve back for any sort of dominance or cybersecurity, like, help, because they lack all credibility in order to make their threats seem credible. That's the Libicki 17 card that I read in the 1NC, because we aren't going to be able to have the authority we need to be like successful in solving back on that. That went uncontested in the 1AR. The only other mechanism you can use to vote for is on the counter plan, because the perm doesn't solve, and the rest of the solvency evidence on the counter plan was conceded.
I got 129. So it's going to go solvency, Iran and China, DA. Is everybody good? First of all, it solves the issue. She tries to claim that the perception of offensive action is what leads to actual conflict. I want you to extend across the naked evidence that even if this perception exists, the offensive action is actually what solves conflict in the long term because we prevent other countries from being able to hack us back. Meaning we solve in the long term. Additionally, the Solmeyer evidence indicates that the cyber command empirically and uniquely is actually able to solve for all of these issues because we take out the exact systems that lead to other countries not wanting to attack back against us. If anything, the diplomacy argument means that we are never actually able to solve because we tried diplomacy means it does not work. Meaning this is try or die for the affirmative. Again, this is only mitigation on the affirmative. If I win any risk of either of my impacts, you're voting for it because she doesn't actually attach a war scenario on any of these terms. That means inevitably this is just mitigation at best. She tried to claim that the cyber command doesn't have credibility to solve. You can extend across the Paganini evidence I read in the last speech that they are the only ones who can actually solve because they're the only ones who can properly justify the risk that we are actually attacking against. Additionally, the NSA literally gave jurisdiction to the cyber command because they're the only ones who can handle these kinds of risks. She also tries to claim that we don't solve back for escalation. But once again, you can extend across that the deterrence is actually able to solve because we actually prevent other countries from escalating because they fear the United States. Additionally, you can extend across my analysis from the China disadvantage, the Heath evidence that says that technological dominance is actually what's able to solve back for these impacts inevitably because we prevent other countries from being able to want to attack us. She tries to claim that retaliation is actually kills deterrence. This was a new argument coming out of last week. She doesn't claim this argument coming out of the NC, so don't grade her this coming out of it right now. Additionally, I post data on this question. Her evidence from 2017, my evidence from 2018 says the cyber command is key. Also, her evidence is not specific to the cyber command. On a ram. I want you to extend across all my analysis coming out of the AR. I don't need to repeat it because it was uncontested coming out of the last speech. That means extinction comes first, and that inevitably we're going to see extinction within 30 minutes, and that's try or die for the affirmative. I mean, even if you think she's winning the disadvantage because it's try or die, we don't know when the attack is going to happen. We need to solve the impact right now. Nukes are going to get hacked by Iran. Diplomacy has been failing, and they've been practicing. It means it can happen at any time, meaning you prioritize the efforts. China, same story, extend across borders and moving to our satellites. B&K, Trump is going to lash out immediately, and that will lead to a space war. Broder goes uncontested as well. This leads to nuclear retaliation. That leads to extinction. Both of these outweigh the DA and trigger the DA, because if nuclear war happens, cyber escalation happens inevitably. Go to the DA. First, she tries to claim that diplomacy is actually what we've been doing, and that's work by doing nothing. No, diplomacy has been failing because we still get hacked by Iran and China every single day. That means inevitably diplomacy doesn't work. She tries to claim that only the perception that I dropped, that only the perception of it is what's going to trigger it. I answered this specifically because I said if this were true, Trump should have already triggered some form of retaliatory attack based on just the perception of other countries. That means inevitably we should have already seen an attack. Also, she drops the hackbacks have been happening in the past, and we've never seen any type of retaliatory strike against other countries, well, meaning that impact is empirically denied. She also drops the Al Jazeera evidence that Trump is warming Russo relations, meaning we're not going to see an impact there. She also doesn't even extend her impact coming out of the last speech, meaning that there's no chance of an impact, and she has a reason as to why the DA outweighs the case. She also drops the Heath evidence that technological dominance is actually key to solve. She just says, no, it's not key to solve, but doesn't give any warranted analysis as to why. Specifically, my evidence indicates that this is empirically what's been working. Go to the perm. She tries to claim intrinsicness on the perm on the counterplan, but she doesn't give any voters. That's why she just says a moving target intrinsicness is good because it helps, like, give better offense for the negative to attack the permutation. Also, she drops it. That means inevitably the DHS can work with it. We inevitably solve. She also drops that there is not a single solvency advocate that the DHS is actually able to work and do these plans. Only the cyber command solves. Extend my analysis.
Good job.